culture. I've learned more about Druidry in Ireland than you can get from, you know, the kind of English school curriculum. It was going to meet Reverend Derlin Robertson, Fellowship of ICEPS founder, who told me about Geoffrey Keating, the great historian of Irish culture, who wrote about the Druid times. And I realised a lot's come down in Ireland about the ancient Druids. And that was the beginning of my fascination for Irish history. And, you know, I appreciate the Irish intellectual tradition right on down to the great poets of the 19th century, Yeats, A.E., and these heavyweights, really. And unfortunately, it's not taught in English schools. You know, I went to Brighton College, one of the best schools in England. Never taught that there was such a thing as Ireland, and it had this rich culture going back to the Bronze Age, and that some of the oldest poetry of the whole of Europe is contained in these Irish legends. No, not a whisper. You know, it's like, what, the Irish? Didn't we conquer them? You know, I mean, the arrogance of that attitude, which is like the received tradition of the Anglican education system of places like Eton and Brighton College and so on. Well, it needs challenging. That's why I think the work of Robert Graves was so important. His father was an Irish scholar, an expert in Celtic studies, and he himself went on to write The White Goddess and realised there is this magical poetic tradition in Britain, Welsh and Irish, and it's there in the, you know, the legend of the Battle of the Trees that he wrote The White Goddess around. And you may not agree with every detail of Graves's work, but he was an opener of that way of seeing things. The realisation that there's this magical poetic tradition in British and Irish culture, which is, that is undeniable. And Graves became Professor of Poetry at Oxford. He deserves, you know, our thanks for that. And also his work on the Greek myths, which is unexcelled to this day, in which he was always pointing out the links between the Greek myths and the Celtic. I wish he'd lived long enough to write the Celtic myths, you know, an oeuvre as big as the Greek myths. I mean, I've tried to do something of that sort in my Encyclopedia of Druid Studies, which is 3 volumes, 1,000 pages. I can't write small. I think Graves had the same problem, and we're similar in our poetic output as well. And I didn't meet Graves, obviously he died before I came on the scene, but I know people that knew him. One of my first ever girlfriends was a, you know, close friend of Robert Graves. She and her mother would go to Dea and meet him, and I was very impressed at that when I first met her in Bristol when I was studying philosophy all those years ago. You know, the wheel of weird turns in interesting ways, but Graves was very mindful of the importance of this Celtic and Druid heritage. He would be utterly appalled with Brexit. He was an intellectual of European stature, a lover of classical Celtic roots. You know, Britain doesn't stand alone. England doesn't stand alone. And for God's sake, the English came off their boats pretty barbaric in nature. They had a few runes, and that was about it. So anyway, yeah, Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland. Well, Brexit makes no sense from the Irish point of view. It's a complete catastrophe. It's an insult to the intellectual history of Ireland and Wales and Scotland. The Irish and the Scots are like brothers and sisters. This will not be accepted. It will go down as a folly. And if Scottish independence and Irish unification come about because of Brexit, so be it. You know, this is what the will of the gods obviously have in store. And the English intelligence state, Windsor, Westminster, will do all they can to prevent it. But you see, you can't actually ultimately, you know, shape history around ego. Your little ego as a sort of, you know, frightened rabbit nation can't stem the tides of history. King Canute tried that, you know, hold the waters back. No. Scottish independence and Irish unification look to me like pretty unstoppable waves, and good luck to them. You know, I greet my Scottish and Irish brothers and sisters in solidarity, because as, you know, a Druid for peace, I think that Brexit was a kick in the teeth by the military intelligence community, weaponising information, Steve Bannon and co. You know, these are military operatives who pretend to be nice guys giving lectures at the Oxford Union, but actually they're really sinister, dark forces. They're the Hitlers of our day. You know, and Nigel Farage and their ilk are still at it, still doing their right-wing, disinformation, psyop stuff. Well, no, sorry, mate. You know, we're calling you out. You deserve to go to prison. In fact, last time I heard, Steve Bannon was arrested and was going to prison. I mean, is he in prison? I mean, he ought to be. Now, to move to a slightly more happy thing, I'd like to say also that this hopefully will be joined at the Stonehenge all-night thing by my friend who's president of the Delphic Games revival, Christian Kirsch. Now, this is really important. The Delphic Games, I mean, I've been to Delphi. I love Delphi. It's my other home, right? I've touched the Omphalos stone. It's the centre of the world, Delphi. If you haven't been to Delphi and just been in love at the sheer awe of the place, the beauty of the mountain, Mount Parnassus, where the Muses dwell, and seen the temples, and there's the temple to Apollo and Athena and so on. This was the great oracular centre of European and Hellenic civilization for over 1,000 years. And the legend is that Apollo came and found it in chaos. There was a python, a great big snake, that was terrorising everybody. It was eating everybody up. It was breathing fire. It was doing the dragony type thing. But it was a really big one. It was totally out of control. And Apollo had the courage and intellect and the wisdom to actually ask it to transmigrate into a different form. And it was in so doing, he killed the python, and then founded the oracle there. And Apollo is the god of the oracles of all humanity. He's also the god of healing and the god of philosophers and intellectuals. So Apollo is like my god, if you want, one of. And he was the god of the sun, the god of light. And the Druids worshipped Apollo, only we called him Luch. And he was the sun god of the European Druid community, and the one of many skills. Luch gave his name to London, Lyon, Carlisle, and many other places. And Stonehenge was said by classical authors that it was a temple to Luch, or the sun god. And and they said a temple to Apollo. Well, they meant Luch. They didn't know the names. They didn't, they hadn't gone. Pausanias knew about the Celtic deities. He was one of the most learned intellectuals around the time of Pompey and Caesar, and Pompey really respected him. But unfortunately, his works didn't come down on the Druids. Anyway, I go into all that in my Encyclopedia of Druid Studies in great detail. I look at what we know about the classical traditions, and how these ancient philosophers looked at Druidry. I wonder if I have. Yes. Let me just go and get the volume in question. Right, so hello, this is the fruit of my, like a year's labour, direct, like daily, plus 30 years or so of studies. This is my 3-volume Encyclopedia of Druid Studies, which, if you haven't got a copy yet, and you're interested in these things, then, there's still time. And I go into detail about all the classical sources, what we know about Druidry from their eyes. And one of the most important sources is an intellectual called Posidonius, who's named after Poseidon, the great god of the sea. And it's interesting, I was talking about water and the importance of lysis. He lived from 135 to 51 BC, and he was a Stoic philosopher. He lived mostly in Rhodes, which I've been to, a wonderful island in the Dodecanese in the Greece Aegean Sea. Posidonius was known as probably the most intelligent of all the Greeks at that time among philosophers. And he knew Pompey, who honoured him. Cicero also met him. Cicero attended the school of Posidonius' teachings in Rhodes, and that influenced Cicero, who was probably the most intelligent of all the Roman intellectuals. When I was at Brighton College, you still learn Latin by reading Cicero. He was a master who then wrote this study of Druidry and the Celtic world, and he went all over Gaul, where I'm speaking from, meeting Druids, learning about their cosmologies and philosophies. But unfortunately that book hasn't come down. I'm hoping that we'll find it in some lost tomb of some Gallo-Roman intellectual here in La Creuse or Auvergne. These are Druid centres in that time, and it's very possible, the lost book of Posidonius could be found. And what I've tried to do in my Encyclopedia of Druid Studies is reconstruct, the fragments of what we know of those times. There is a book come out by Philip Freeman, The Philosopher and the Druids, A Journey Among the Ancient Celts, about this, the loss of his work and what it might have been. And there was also a study by Tierney, the Celtic ethnography of Posidonius, produced by the Royal Irish Academy, which is based in Dublin. So, that's the sort of detail that I've gone into in this book, and to me it's absolutely fascinating. There's 3 volumes. This is volume 1, which goes from Abaris, who was the Celtic friend, Druid, seer, colleague of Pythagoras, down to the Theobolg kings, who were the ancient Irish, some of the ancient Irish royalty. And then volume 2 is looking at huge amounts of stuff. Okay, it's a huge work, and I think you'll enjoy it. Now, moving on, and that's why I'm chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland. That's why I'm so opposed to Brexit. It's such a nonsense from an ethnographic, intellectual, political, philosophical perspective. The forces that wanted it are all anti-intellectual, anti-philosophy, anti-education, anti-higher education. How could anyone think that Britain losing all those rich mixtures of students between European and French and Finnish and Greek and Italian students all coming and studying in each other's countries through the Erasmus programme and so on, how can that be a good thing? No, of course it's not. It's a shutting down, a narrowing of our mental perspectives. And to say that, well, no, we want to go off and become trans-internationalists and we want to join the Asia-Pacific thing. Well, all of that's possible if we'd have remained a member of the European Union. None of that was a problem. Our internationalism was guaranteed and underpinned by our Europeanness, in my opinion. And the many peoples that make up the British Isles, the Irish, the Welsh, the Scots, the English, and the many, many immigrant communities that have come over the centuries, and we're all richer by being part of Europe, intellectually and spiritually. And Christianity, I just want to have a little rant about Boris Johnson's marriage. The cheek of him marrying in Westminster Cathedral in a Catholic ceremony is utterly abhorrent to me. The man doesn't deserve to have done that. I know Westminster Cathedral well, I love it, I've been there, I've prayed there, been to services there. It has a wonderful chapel to Irish Catholicism, Chapel St Patrick, with beautiful green marble, go and check it out. Westminster Cathedral's near Victoria Station. It's a marvellous place. The Catholic tradition is the universal tradition of European Christianity. And Britain's great Catholic intellectuals have always been Europhiles, starting with Thomas à Becket and, the founders of Christianity in Britain, St. Augustine, etc. The founders of Christianity in England, particularly, also were always, many of them were from Europe, many of the early bishops and archbishops. And its language was Latin, which is the common language of European intellectuals for the last 2,000 years. So, Boris has tried to destroy all that European intellectual heritage. And now for him to trot along and think he's entitled to a marriage in one of its sacred centres, it should be annulled, that marriage. He is not a Catholic. He is the opposite. He's an anti-Catholic. Brexit is an anti-Catholic and anti-Christian movement. It has no concept of ethics or no concept of European solidarity. That's just a farce. Okay, and he's destroyed the peace of Ireland as a result of his Brexit nonsense. And it's not just him; it's the people behind him, the Goves, and all the sort of cacodemon, monsters released from hell, the Pretty Patel types. These people are maverick, fake politicians that operate on lies. It's very interesting that a memoir's just come out proving that, 2/3 of the British cabinet are in the pay of extreme Zionist right-wing pressure groups in Israel, the US. They're getting checks from these people. One of the forces that supported Brexit was the Israeli government under Netanyahu, using its dark web of agents to promote Brexit because they don't like the European Union. Netanyahu and his Zionist cohorts, extreme right-wing people, who've denied rights and equality to the Palestinians consistently, ever since Rabin was murdered by an extreme right-wing Israeli fanatic. Rabin had known that we have to make peace between Israel and Palestine and had got the Oslo Accords going. Well, then he was shot dead in cold blood by a conspiracy led by right-wing Israelis who've been running the country ever since. And Netanyahu is their chosen man. And and Brexit was one of their big bids. Now, Alan Duncan, the foreign minister, who was deputy foreign minister, has just published his memoirs proving all this, saying, look, hey, I was blocked from becoming proper foreign minister because the British cabinet is effectively being controlled by the Israeli embassy in London. And he documents this. This isn't conspiracy theory, this is fact. Alan Duncan deserves a knighthood for revealing this, because it's true, and he names names. He says this agent working in the Israeli embassy in London was pressurising the Conservative Party to ensure that I, Alan Duncan, don't rise anywhere, and promoting the career of Boris Johnson because he is a puppy in their hands, and this is shocking and very revealing. And I've been saying this, like a voice crying in the wilderness, for some time, ever since the Brexit results were then interpreted, and it's been done in a way that is conducive to what Israeli right-wing, hard-right Zionists think is in their interests. It's not actually, Injustice is never in the interests of good people. And the progressive, genuine, intelligent, intellectual heritage of Israel that I am, friends with, and the traditions of people like Rabbi Judah Magnes that I talked about last time, who was the first principal of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, people like Martin Buber, the Einstein. The true Jewish mind wants peace with the Palestinians. I'll be coming back to that in a minute, but what's so shocking is that Brexit was a product of the opposite kind. And I think this is a scandal that needs to be investigated. How did British intelligence let the Israeli embassy conduct Conservative Party policy, which then becomes British Conservative Party, British government policy. How did they let Priti Patel go off to meet Netanyahu privately? Okay, she was forced to resign after that, but how come she's back in power as Home Office Minister? You know, these revelations by Alan Duncan are really, really important. I mean, everyone should read his book to see how Brexit was done, you know, and how it was engineered by these extreme right-wing Zionist influences, thinking that Britain is a failed state, they can just literally take over. And, you know, the Queen having no ability to stand up to them. Don't they know what's been going on? I mean, what on earth has happened to British intelligence? Has it been utterly taken over, you know, and sold out, and it's now run from Tel Aviv and the Israeli embassy in London? I mean, it looks like that. Well, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. You know, it's not even in the interests of the true Israel. The interests of the true Israel that I love and support are peace with the Palestinians, not endless war of the Netanyahu variety who makes, you know, he would go to war with a tree if, you know, if you let him loose. I mean, the guy's a psychopath. So anyway, long story, that's why I'm opposed to Brexit. But I'm an internationalist, so of course I support the Delphic Games. I want to see them reborn. And for my Druid brothers and sisters, we support the Lord of Light, Apollo, who is the master of the Delphic Games. And I'm hoping my friend Christian and others in a network will be able to convene the Delphic Games. Back in Delphi itself, there's been a series of events and Delphiads taking place, but we need to have an actual Delphic Games in Delphi itself. And Delphi, of course, is named after the dolphin, which was one of the magical creatures that Apollo inspires works with. Dolphins are some of the most intelligent creatures on the planet. Some say more intelligent than humans, more ethical. I know people who swum with dolphins. Dolphins can heal you with just a touch. They're cosmic beings, and you know, let's honour them. And it's also the emblem of my British home city, Brighton. The dolphin is our emblem, so it's a city sacred to Apollo. Apollo is also the god of healing, and I will just say for this week an update on the launch and progress of the International Commission of Inquiry into the etiology of COVID-19. There isn't another thing like it. Since I announced it, in parallel, I noticed that Biden has tasked the American intelligence community to find out what caused this thing. Well, good luck with that. I've said all along, it'll never happen. We'll never know until the UN invokes, at the request of a member state, the International Bioweapons Convention. Because the fact of the matter is that there are biologists working in secret labs around the world. We know the names of some of them: Fort Detrick, Wuhan, etc. Porton Down. You know, there are dark engineers of biology working to make these diseases, these viruses, lethal. They're creating bioweapons against the law that was written into the American legal system by a professor of law who will be giving testimony to the commission when we have our online Zoom thing, and I've received some documentation from him. You know, it's scandalous that these people are allowed to do this. And finally, people are waking up. Nicholas Wade, the journalist, and others are exposing what's been going on behind our back. You know, people like me have been working for peace for the last decades, and yet these scientists paid vast amounts of money are making weapons of mass destruction. We thought the nuclear weapons are the worst threat, but actually it looks like the bioweapons are also a threat. Now, I'm not saying, as chair of this commission, I'm not saying, yes, it was a bioweapon that leaked. I'm saying it might have been. And the might requires investigation. You know, I've worked in medicine. You check out the etiology of a disease. So, that's progressing, and that we will have a live meeting in August. If you know anything about the etiology of this virus, either way, if you're convinced it was an accident from bats, or if you're convinced it was a leak by some kind of research going on, get in touch, send me the documents, send me the evidence, and it will be tabled and dealt with accordingly. Other projects I'm involved with at the moment, well, I want to share a few. I mean, there's the Institute is busy. I'm busy here at the Institute headquarters in France, and there are colleagues working with me, but I want to share also the update of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, which was set up in 2008, 2009. Nicola and I went to film interviews with people in Palestinian refugee camps. We interviewed intellectuals in both Israel and Palestine, amazing people that wanted peace. And that work is continuing. But I think what I've realised, reluctantly and with a sort of horror, that sort of sinking feeling, that, you see, you can't have truth and reconciliation between two parties if one party is stone deaf and won't talk. I know as a mediator, you can't mediate if one party simply refuses to come to the mediation and insults the other. And what we've got in the Palestine-Israel conflict is one party, Israel, is very happy. They've got a state, they've got an army, they've got a well-organised society. They have wealth, they have deals with countries like America. You can be a joint Israeli-US citizen, and the US won't let anyone else be a dual citizen. I can't be a dual Canadian-American citizen. I can't be a dual British-American citizen. I can only apparently be a joint Israeli-American citizen, which is weird, actually. But I've been told by an American friend of mine that is the legal situation, who was trying to become a dual American-British citizen, was told, no, you can't. So, Israel has been refusing, because it's buttressed by American wealth and income, and it's got billions of dollars flowing in every year ever since it was founded, especially selling weapons and so on. That gives it this security umbrella, which has enabled it to ignore the wishes of the Palestinian people and the indigenous people that lived there originally. Now, my Israeli friends say, well, it's not our fault. We won the war in 1948 and 1967. And, we won. Sorry, you can't grumble. I mean, did you want us to lose? No, but I think that under international law, even if you win a war, you have then certain duties towards the victims. You can't just leave them in a legal limbo and give them no rights and make their lives hell. And you can't pinch their land and so on, as the Israeli settlement movement has been doing, including in East Jerusalem. But that's what they've been doing. They've been getting away with it because the international community has this sort of guilt complex about Israel and the Jews, and because of the Holocaust, it sort of, it gives them like 100 points in the handicap race of nations. And so it turns a blind eye to what it's been up to. Well, that's not fair. I mean, yes, it was terrible, the Holocaust, and that generation suffered immensely, and it was scandalous and so on. But that doesn't justify then doing the same back, almost to the Palestinians. There's no logic. Two wrongs don't make a right, as it said when I was a kid growing up in Kemp Town. That was what was taught to me. Two wrongs don't make a right. And that is still the code of ethics that I think the world follows. So what can we do about this? Okay, well, watching the bombs falling on Gaza, watching them destroy the Al Jazeera and other media centres, watching the cynicism of Netanyahu speaking as if this is all jolly good, dancing on the graves of Palestinian kids. Enough is enough. I won't sit back and do nothing. As the peace druid of Britain and Europe and a peace philosopher, I haven't trained for 30 years to let these scoundrels get away with this stuff. Sorry. And so I've decided that enough is enough, and it's time to create something new, which I've been working on this last week with help from colleagues. And I call this ICEPS. It's a nice acronym, actually, because it stands for biceps. It's about a bit of strength here. ICEPS is the International Commission for the Establishment of a Palestinian State. Simple ICEPS. The only way to address this crisis is to get a Palestinian state in existence, legally recognised by all the UN, legally recognised by Israel, supported by the UN all the international legal bodies. And it's about writing a constitution that every Palestinian can accept. It's about getting its borders and territories agreed with Israel. It's kind of restarting the Oslo peace talks that were supposed to have done this, and did lead to the current Palestinian National Authority, of which Mahmoud Abbas is president, but that's not the complete Palestinian state that the Palestinians themselves want and need. And so, so I've just been writing this week the founding documents of this and looking at the complexity of it. And it's a mountain to climb, but it's got to be climbed in the name of the people that are being killed, those 200 and so people in Gaza that were just slaughtered. And Gaza's just sitting duck. I mean, are we going to stand back as the world community and let Israel just bomb that whenever it wants? Yes, Netanyahu looks like he's falling, and I sincerely hope he steps down and goes to his trial, as is long overdue. And I hope that the new incoming Israeli government then begins to talk seriously with the Palestinians about the two-state solution. Every country in the world wants a two-state solution. That's what they all say, except Netanyahu's government. But you see, logically, I'm just looking at this mathematically, you can't have a two-state solution unless you have two states. We already have one Israeli state. Well, we need to help create the second state, which is the Palestinian state. Well, why am I doing that? I'm not Palestinian. I'm just a sort of British internationalist. Yeah, okay, fine, but I'm in the tradition of Bentham, and Bentham wrote constitutions for quite a few Latin American states that came into being on his watch. University College, which he founded, has a constitutional unit that can write constitutions. So I'm saying that the British intellectuals and those of us in Europe that support a two-state solution, and indeed everywhere in the world, should work with our Palestinian friends to help give teeth, substance and weight to a reborn Palestinian state. And I believe it's in the interests of Israel to do so. Israel needs a Palestinian state to make peace with. One of the things I explain in the document is that all the evidence points to the fact that Israel deliberately created and bigged up Hamas from a small little sort of Islamic charity in Gaza into a big power that now runs Gaza. It was the creation of Israel deliberately to break up Palestinian unity. They tried to destroy Arafat's charisma, his credibility, which was a scandalous thing to have done, and they also seem to have executed him in assassination using polonium. Al Jazeera did research into this and discovered that Arafat was killed, obviously by Israel, probably in association with American intelligence. These are scandals that the world needs to clear. We need to heal this before we can move on. And I'm speaking as a priest of Apollo here. We can't get healing to get truth. And truth, if it costs, it costs, but it's the only thing that heals. Doctors can't really heal you until they know the truth of what's causing your illness. So ICEPS is coming into being, my friends, and I look forward to your collaboration and support for that. And I've written a protocol document I'm willing to share with people about that. And I've known many great Palestinian intellectuals. We have on the board of the World Intellectual Forum some. Sarim Nasabi, who was the rector of the University of East Jerusalem, is one of them. And I look forward to working with them on giving birth to this Palestinian state, because this current situation cannot continue, where Israel has all the power, all the weapons, all the might, all the money. Palestinians are lucky to have a few olive trees if they're not burned down already. This is ridiculous. Enough is enough. The fact that Israel has dared to